start the recording and pass this over to Kim.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me in to your webinar. Yeah, and thank you. That's one thing that I want you all to know is I really want this to be interactive. Yes, I have information that I will share with you and some things about our program that seem to be really effective, but I'm also setting aside time for your successes, your challenges. What do you do? What do you use that really works with the learners with whom you're working? So I'll start out with just a little bit of an overview about the program. It's actually a Penn State funded program. We get our funding through the Department of Ed. There was a special grant that was made available for a tutoring program in a state correctional facility. So we are under the Career Pathways umbrella of Penn State University under the Institute for the Study of Adult Literacy. So I actually work on site in the prison 4 days a week. We have tutoring sessions Monday through Thursday. Because the scheduling has really gotten complicated with the inmates. The scheduling is such that there's 2 separate zones in the prison now, and so I can't mix those zones. So when I was there prior to COVID, we could mix everybody. My tutors could do any of the time sessions. Now they're very limited. So when we talk about challenges with setting up tutoring programs, right, this is one that has come about with the program. But basically we have 2 days a week, Mondays and Thursdays, that we have 2 morning sessions, 2 afternoon sessions, and then 2 evening sessions. Then on Tuesday and Wednesday, we have 2 afternoon sessions and 2 evening sessions. Thanks, Samuel. I was just going to ask if you could mute. I was getting a little bit of feedback. So they have the one zone can come in the morning or the evening, and the other zone can come in the afternoon. When they come, they're required to come to 2 tutoring sessions, a minimum of 2 tutoring sessions a week, and each session is about an hour and a half. To back up and kind of tell you how it gets started, anybody in the program, interested in the program, whether they're a tutor or learner, starts out with a one-on-one interview with me. So we do that, then tutors go one direction, learners go another direction. Tutors come back and do a tutor training with me. So, and keep in mind that all participants in this program are inmates. This is not a Penn State students come in and tutor inmates. This is SCI Muncy inmates tutor SCI Muncy learners. So tutors do a tutor training. Learners go through the same intake, orientation, testing process that all of the learners do. Then we get to match them up and they get started. Tutors are in charge. All the tutoring sessions happen with me there, but tutors are in charge of the sessions. So you can see this picture here. This is kind of my room in the prison and one of the inmates who I was interviewing one day. We have no computer access. Everything that I do is handwritten and with the help of a number of the staff at the prison. But the key thing with this is having that interaction and that good relationship with the staff at the prison. That's what has kind of made or would have broken this program had it not been a good relationship and a lot of support. So tutors make their own lesson plans. They do paperwork for me, and they rely on some instructional material books like TABE Tutor, TABE Mastery, a variety of different books, but they also have found the value in supplementing that with additional activities. And that's more what I'm going to talk about today. If at any point anyone has any questions, feel free to type them into the chat window or raise your hand, and I will be glad to entertain your questions at any point during the presentation. So in general, some of the math activities for tutors, all of you know, I'm guessing if you're on this webinar, you are tutoring someone in math, or you have done so, or you will be doing so. And you understand that so often the main thing with these adult learners is they don't have confidence. They very well may have heard, oh, you just aren't good at math. You can't do math. So the concepts of math are overwhelming to them. And I was telling Rachel earlier, just, why a short story about why we do this. Last night, I was working with a learner. So I'm fortunate enough when a tutor doesn't show up, I often get to work with the learners. So I was working with this learner, and she started out a few months ago, not knowing her times tables, not being able to multiply, and just being so intimidated by the process, right? You guys can all relate. You've worked with people like that. You've seen them. She's got the added, she's in prison. So, there's the trauma from whatever got her there to being there. But this woman is ready, and when they're ready. So she came in last night. She can now do multiplication. She can now divide. She now knows her times tables. And this is just by that one-on-one and some of the, doing the extra activities. We know we have to teach differently to these learners, but that doesn't always mean it has to be some way out of the box thinking. With this woman particularly, it's just that extra one-on-one time that you sit down and you show them patience and you show them confidence and you show them, you've got this, you can do this, and we're going to walk through it. So last night, I was off-site for the month of February because of COVID. I was volunteers. I'm considered a volunteer at the prison. I was kicked out for the month. So I was sending them packets. I sent her a packet that kind of had some of the new math type approach to multiplication, and it completely threw her off. So she brought it in last night and said, Ms. Roush, I can't do this. I don't know how to do this. I said, all right, we'll look at it together. Well, within 5 minutes of just like all of you do, that one-on-one where you step by step say, this is what this is really saying. This is what this really means. You write it out along with the process. So really getting them engaged, and whether you make it realistic or you physically have them write down what's in front of you, those are really beneficial things. So within, we were working on it for a little while. I left her to do a few problems on her own while I did something else. I come back and her face is lit up, right? You all know what those light bulb moments are like. Her face is lit up. She says, Miss Roush, I got it. I could do it. And part of it was word problems. How many of you have students that the word problems, they look at the words and they're done before they even read the first word? That was her response until we did one together. So when you equip them, when you show them the confidence, when you give them the resources, they're not used to being set up for success. But I'm preaching to the choir here, all of that. So one of the things that I wanted to mention that was brought up at a recent ANI, the Adult Numeracy Institute meeting, that I have found really helpful to share with tutors is the whole concept of having the learners, teach something back to the learner, the tutor, my gosh, having the learner teach something back to the tutor. So we know that one of the best ways of demonstrating understanding of something is to be able to teach it. So the whole thought was, so often we use drills and worksheets where it's repetition, repetition, repetition. There's certainly a time and place for that. But we also know that if they have done a whole worksheet of repetitious problems and they got the concept wrong at the third problem and carried that all down through, that's really just embedding the wrong thinking in there. So if after a couple of problems, you stop and have the student explain to you what they're doing, their thought process. So it goes along with thinking out loud, then that can really be beneficial, and it can help the learners gain some confidence in the skills. So that's one of the things that I have found very helpful to share with the tutors. One thing I forgot to mention is that in the program, every month when situation is ideal and I'm able to, and I'm on site, we have tutor meetings. So I'm able to, I have to do it in a couple of groups, but I'm able to then share information like that technique for teaching math to the whole group at once. And so it's like, I mean, it's a monthly tutor community meeting. We get together, we share, just like you do during these webinars, successes, challenges, tips. I've turned it into a professional development opportunity for them. They present on different topics as well. So that's when I'm able to give them tips as a whole, as a group, about suggestions for teaching math. So one of the other things that came from one of the adult numeracy institutes was the idea of a number of the day. And we do an exit ticket every day. So on the board, there are various options and they can choose what, they can make it their choice to do the number of the day. The first person in the classroom gets to pick a number, and that number goes up on the board for the number of the day. Anyone who chooses that number of the day for their exit ticket just shows how many ways they can represent, and in this case, it's the number 16. The ways in which they show that are certainly going to reflect where they are in their math skills. And you may need to have tutors kind of prompt them to dig a little deeper, make it a little bit more difficult, add some variables in there, add some fractions in there, depending on where they are. But the exit ticket is one way that we start to jumpstart their math brain at the beginning of a session. I have found it's useful to put a time limit on this. Just setting it out there, you sometimes just get, 1 times 16, 16 times 1. But if you put a time limit on it, it will help them focus. And it can also be done as a bell ringer in a classroom. Does anyone have any thoughts, anything to share, any questions before I move on to the next slide? All right. So in the prison, we had difficulty getting some materials in, but fortunately, a number of the former instructors, one of them being their special ed instructor, just donated a whole lot of materials to us. Some of the materials he donated are these fraction, decimal, and then there's also a set of percent cubes that we use. And these have been extremely helpful. Now, they've also been very confusing for some. So just like you have to adapt your instruction. What works for one is not going to work for everyone. And that's part of the beauty of one-on-one tutoring for all of you and for my program, for the tutoring program in the prison as well. So these fraction cubes or the decimal or the percent cubes are really good for giving visuals. So they can see, okay, this is the one whole. You can break it apart in two for the halves on down through. It's also really good when comparing fractions. So if you want to show them that 1/6 is significantly less than 1/2, you can look at the visual. It's good for equivalent fractions as well. 1/2 is the same as 2/4. Very good for that. Then you can break them apart and show the comparison in the decimal and in the percent version as well. The next key part with this is taking it into real life application, right? And I'm sure you're all very good at bringing in that real life application into your instruction. So what's this look like in the world? Where do I see fractions or percents? So then we talk about money. We often talk about money, and my example last night, we were looking at negative numbers and positive and subtracting and add. I said, well, basically it's the difference between me owing you money or you owing me money. And we look at it that way. Fractions, a quarter, 25 cents, a fraction, making that connection. Another way that the ladies in the prison can often relate is through recipes. And so we often will work with the culinary department, and he'll send students down who need help with their measuring skills, their doubling recipes. So we have gotten measuring cups from him or measuring spoons in order to have that visual of the fractions and how much is more than, less than, equivalent to. Then again, breaking it into percents and decimals is also really helpful. When I started in adult literacy a long time ago, I was surprised by a lot of things. I was naive enough to not realize there was an adult literacy problem. Well, my eyes were open, certainly, but then when I got into prison, I was kind of awakened to a whole new level of low literacy skills, and one of those being the inability to use rulers and yardsticks. So for me, growing up, it was just something I did. We used them, and that is not the case. And I don't know if any of you have learners that you found the same thing with, but when they get into a book and they're looking at measurements for things, they will flat out say, I have no idea how to use a ruler. So we get them out, and the rulers then can be really helpful. As you can imagine, breaking a foot down, portions of a foot, what a fraction of an inch looks like, what a fraction of a foot looks like, comparing them to the metric system. So they'll go around the room measuring books, measuring tables, measuring each other, whatever it might be. And then it's helpful to, like I said, compare them to the metric system as well. So that was kind of an eye-opener to me, the amount of people that really have low measuring skills. The other thing that we use, and I did not put a slide in here, but is clocks. I was working with one woman through packets while I was off site, and the whole concept of if you start at this time and end at this time, how much time has elapsed and how you go from those 60 minutes to an hour and 5 minutes or whatever the transition may be. So that is often, we have little paper clocks that we use to manipulate time as well. So that's another thing that we have found a need for.
Kim, this is Lynn. I would agree
Hi.
with you that it's not just students in prison who have that problem. I have noticed that many of our students who come through have no idea how to measure a ruler and had no idea of the relationship of the ruler to fractions. So I just wanted to mention that. I think it's universal.
Thanks, Lynn. I agree. I think it's something that just isn't taught nearly as much as it used to be, isn't used like it used to be. And I think it's still really needed. One of the vocational programs that they have in the tutoring program is business trades. And there are a lot of people from the business trades program that will come in for tutoring because of math, measurements, conversions, that just don't know, haven't used a measuring tape, haven't used a ruler, that sort of thing. So I would happen to agree.
Kim?
So the last, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add the idea that Lynn mentioned about how they don't relate the ruler to fractions. I think it really just takes in the experience, right, of turning that ruler around and looking at the specific little lines in between the intervals, right, and this idea of intervals and connecting it to a number line, right? And so something
Right.
that we've done in the Adult Numeracy Institute is give index cards and have the participants or the students order fractions or order different measurements. And so really accessible, really easy task to help students get the idea of distance from zero or distance from a particular benchmark. I think just reinforcing the idea of the number line with that measurement is just a powerful tool.
I agree. I absolutely think that is the case. And anytime we can make a connection from like the ruler to the number line to height to anything in real life, anytime we can connect fractions and decimals and percents and make it real to them, I can't tell you how many learners we have worked with in the tutoring program, and I'm speaking specifically to SCI Muncy, and I know it's the same across the board, but that didn't understand that there was a connection between fractions and decimals and percents. They see them as these entirely different concepts that have no relationship to each other. So when you can make those relationships, and then when you can bring them into what they're doing in their daily life, then you start to see those light bulb or those aha moments. We had one young woman, so I have like different phases of the tutoring program. I have the tutoring program when I first started. So that was like 3 years ago, a little more than 3 years ago. I was on site for about a year and a half. Things were going phenomenally. It was just taking off like crazy. COVID hit. I was off site for a year and a half, trying to keep people engaged with packets, and really, as you all have seen in your programs, numbers dropped like crazy. I was back on site. I got in July, and I was on site until January, the end of January. And then I just got back on site last week. So it's like I have phases of the tutoring program. So pre-COVID, we had a young woman who hated fractions, absolutely was terrified of fractions, came into the tutoring program with this one night in particular. She was usually a pretty chipper, upbeat, positive girl, comes into the tutoring program one night with this big chip on her shoulders and just, and that can be intimidating in a prison setting, right? So I talked to her and I was like, what's going on? This isn't normally you. We're working on fractions tonight and I hate fractions. I can't do fractions. I'm like, okay, well, let's sit down and look at it. Between just taking that time, taking that one-on-one time and making it real to her, and then letting the tutor work one-on-one. I kind of de-escalated her and then turned it over to the tutor. And within 20 minutes, I hear this, I get it. And at that point, we didn't have to worry about the number of students and inmates in the room. We probably had a room full of 20 people. And she just shouts out, I get it. I love this. And, that's why you do what you do, right? For those moments and for those moments in between when you're on that plateau and you're not making progress and continuing to push through, knowing that light bulb moment is out there. But to be able to make that change, just, and like I said, it's not earth shattering. It's not anything major. Sometimes it is really creative strategies. Sometimes it is thinking out of the box. Sometimes it's just being there, supporting one-on-one, giving them that extra time and instruction that they probably did not get early on. So when, in an all-female prison, I often will hear, I'm a woman, I'm not good at math. No, not true. Maybe, no one ever taught math to you in a way that made sense to you, but we're not going to go with, no, you're not good at math. So one of the things, they're not allowed to swear in the tutoring program. So can't is a 4-letter word that they're not allowed to use. So when they say, I can't do, no, it might be difficult, but we can work through it and we'll get you there. So you're learning as much about the tutoring program as you are about math things. And I apologize for that, but it's not, it's nothing earth shattering. Like I said, one of the things that we have a lot of success with are games and riddles, just to get people's heads going in math. So we know that when we engage our emotions, the learning sticks better, right? So if you make something fun, if you make something exciting, if you really engage the emotions, there's going to be more retention of the learning materials. So one of the games that we were donated, one of the more popular games that we were donated was a fractions bingo game. And learners and tutors will use this either as a reward or a reinforcement, or sometimes it's what they do for a whole tutoring session. The game is designed so that you can either go with the fraction that, there's a little spinning wheel. You can either go just with the exact fraction that you have on there, or you can go with equivalent fractions on your bingo card. So sometimes we'll have pairs of tutors and learners get together and play a game. Sometimes it's just a tutor and their learner. But anytime you can get those games going and really get them having fun, so often adult learners, whether it's in the prison or in your programs, didn't experience learning as a fun experience. So when you can make it fun and they can see that learning can be enjoyable, it's always a good thing. Each week I post a riddle. And this is one of the riddles that I posted a couple of weeks ago. So this is where I'm going to shut up for a little bit and I am going to ask you some questions. So in this riddle where Mr. Jones was 90 inches plus half his height, how tall was he? What do you think? And you can either unmute yourself and say it, or you can type it in the chat window. What do you think the most common answer was? Not what the correct answer is, what the most common answer was. What do you think it was?
$135.
Yep, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So how can you talk us through how you would explain to your learner that that's not the case?
I'm not sure how I would explain it because I'm not sure what they're saying. It's very confusing.
Okay. All right. And that's an excellent point. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is often the response of both the tutors and the learners. You're absolutely spot on. What would anybody else say? Anyone?
Well, I was thinking about those fraction bars that you had before, and thinking about if you have the whole one, then what would the half be, and imagining what the two halves have to be in order to make the whole. So
90 inches plus half his height.
So if half of his height is missing, and the other half is, then the other half must be the part right? So,
Okay.
so I don't know. I'm not explaining it well, but I'm thinking about if you are missing half his height, then you need the 90 inches to be half of his height, right? So you would have 90 plus the other half, so 90 and 90. So then the whole thing would be 180. That's how I was sort of thinking about it.
Okay, all right.
But I see
All right.
some people putting, Diana put a formula in.
There you go. Sorry, I wasn't getting a message that I wasn't getting a message of the chats. Okay, so 90.5. Yes, I have gotten that answer. Then Diana put the formula in there. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Yeah, yes. So it's a great, you can see how it can engage conversation and make people think about it. So even if you have learners who aren't used to using variables, you can use an exercise like this. So I'm trying to, I was hoping to be able to draw on here, but I guess I'm not figuring it out. Text.
You should be able to do the annotate.
Oh, you know what? I see what I'm doing. Let me try this again. Yeah, okay. So if the way I do it is I explain to the learner that H, hold on, is the total height, okay? We know that H equals, and this is the formula that Diana and some others put in there, equals 90 plus half of his total height. So this goes along with the visual that Rachel was giving you. So then we get to use this formula and solve it for H. So then we talk about how we would do that, and we would end up with H over 2 equaling 90 and H equaling 180. I did my math right, didn't I, Maribel? Wouldn't be good if I wasn't.
It looks good to me.
Does that help, Samuel?
Yeah. I mean, it took me a while to read it before I understood what it said.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And that's often the case. So, and it's helpful to relate that information to your learner, right? To say, yeah, it didn't really make sense to me either, but once I thought about it, I was able to work through it and figure it out.
The equation makes much more sense than the English.
Yeah, and isn't that often the case with the learners, that they can understand one or the other, but to connect the two is where there's often disconnect. So if you can help them make that transition between, okay, this is what the words look like, but this is what the math and words look like, and see that they're basically one and the same, and one may or may not make sense to them, but they really are the same thing. Because that is a very difficult step for a lot of them. They can't take those words from the word problem and put them into a math equation. So we have a lot of cheat sheets that we use for words, you know, those key words. So plus tells us that we're adding, you know, the key words that will help the learners understand what corresponding math practice or math skill they're supposed to use. So we do that a lot to help them break down. And, you know, in word problems, breaking out the words that, the parts of it that aren't necessary. Well, we can read all these words, but you don't really need all of this. So how do you eliminate, how do you decide which information is not important? I want to bring us back to this word problem, this riddle that we're working on, though, because there's another aspect to it. Does anybody else see another aspect to this math problem that could be addressed in a tutoring session or with anyone doing the problem?
Well, you could change the inches into feet.
Mm-hmm. Could definitely do that. You could change it into feet.
Which gives you a really weird answer.
It does. What did we decide that was? I think we said it was 15 feet. I'm working off my memory here. I'm not doing the math on this, so somebody please correct me. Am I right? You're a tough crowd. Yes, okay, 15 feet.
It's right to me.
So then we get to start a whole new discussion, right? What discussion would you start with a learner if you came up with a problem like this and your answer was 15 feet?
I might touch upon ideas of reasonability. Like, is it reasonable? Is it a reasonable answer?
Yeah. Get them again, applying what they're looking at to real life. Does this make sense? Well, let's get out that yardstick. How tall would a 15-foot person be? Oh, wait, they couldn't walk in the door. We couldn't get them in the room. Is it realistic? So we've got the word problem. We've got coming up with the formula. And Diane, I like you were able to come up with the formula, but solving it was a different thing. And that's often a sticking point as well. Those formulas can be tricky for people to calculate through. So we've got the formula, the word problem, we've got the conversion from inches to feet, we've got the realisticness. Is this, use your logic, use your thinking. Is this would somebody be 15 feet in today's world? And then there's one other thing that I can think of that we would have done with this problem. I'm sure you probably have more as well. Does anyone have anything else that they would possibly throw in with this?
Well, they could make riddles about their own height.
Yeah. I like that idea. Make riddles about their own height. The other thing that I'm thinking of was, what if you said, well, okay, so that height isn't really reasonable, but what if this were centimeters instead of inches? Oh, that does not look like a cm. Sorry. What if it were centimeters instead of inches? Would that make it a realistic height?
Yeah.
So if you calculate this out using 90 centimeters, if I did everything correctly, that came up to approximately 6 feet. So that would make it a more realistic answer. So what I also wanted to, that's pretty much all I have on the riddle. But what I wanted to also set aside some time for is your successes, your challenges, your questions, your comments on either anything that I have shared or anything that you have found to be really successful or challenging in a situation that you're in, whether it is someone that you're tutoring or have tutored. Anything you want to throw out there, I wanted to set aside some time for you to share as well. So feel free.
All right, I'll help you out. This is Lynn.
Thank you, Lynn.
When going back to the ruler, and if you talked about this, because I had a student come in and get me during part of your webinar, so I had to step out for a minute. But one of the activities that I did to help students understand the difference, the activity of using a ruler and then the difference between metric and English, is we took pieces of masking tape and I let the students go around and just rip a piece off and put it on different tables. So then each student went around and measured it and they created their own chart. And then when they were done, they had to check each other's work. And if we had all the same answer, we celebrated. And if we had different answers, we went back and measured it as a group to see what the answer was, so that it was very random and yet very much an activity because the students were involved in it and they enjoyed it.
I like that. Yeah, that's a great idea. I like that.
And then we
might have to
threw in
steal
some
that idea.
addition and subtraction of measuring the difference, actually doing the math between differences, like the total amount or the difference between two tables, two different measurements, so you could take it further if you wanted also. The students liked it.
Yeah. Well, and another really great point about doing an activity like that is getting them up and physically active, right? We spend so much of our time sedentary anymore. The more you can get them up and physically engaged in whatever activity it is, I think that adds another layer of retention to your activities, and the engagement will really help them. Yeah, thank you, Lynn. Who else has something to share?
Hi, Kim. Just reinforcing what you said about some cheat sheets. I have used a list of keywords for solving word problems, and that seems to work well. And just keep the cheat sheet next to the student while doing the problem so they can refer to it, I think helps. And I really
I think
like your idea when you're using a worksheet to stop early on and have the student explain how they're doing the problems to make sure they're not doing a full sheet incorrectly. I think that's a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think that was Joanne. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Joanne. I appreciate that feedback. And I think you're absolutely right. We grew up, well, some of us grew up, you're not allowed to count on your fingers. You have to memorize everything. You can't use a calculator. You can't use a formula sheet. You can't. That didn't work for the learners in our programs, right? So why keep pounding it in? Let it go. Count on your fingers. They're with you everywhere you go. Why not rely on them? Let them rely on some things that are always going to be available to them. If you can wean them off, or if they can wean off of them at some point, okay, but a formula sheet or a tips sheet that they can always refer back to is so helpful. A couple of the things that I've really found with the ladies at prison, trauma. Yes, there's the emotional, the physical trauma, but a lot of brain injuries as well. So I had one woman try to opt out of the tutoring program because she came to me and she said, I can't do this. I've had too many concussions. I'm like, well, I got you on that one. I've had way more concussions than anybody I ever know. And you can do this. But it is different. It's really, really different to approach life. And it's taken me years to realize it, but it's very different to approach life with TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, that impact your learning. But it can be done. And I was talking with this woman last night. Yes, it affects you, but you just adapt. You don't quit. You just adapt. So many of the ladies in prison, it's a place to quit, right? But the tutoring program isn't. So between the trauma and drug use, their brains do work differently, and it is harder for them to retain information. So the more formula sheets, tips, whatever you can give them to rely on, with repetition, I think, being the main thing, the repetition and the ability to give them confidence are key things for all of our adult learners. And I think I just get to see it amplified in the situation where I am. What else? What else do you have to share or ask?
Just to follow up on that, Kim, I've also had success with having students make their own tip sheets and formula sheets and things like that. And if they have, if they are struggling with memory issues, or if they plan to go to college or do anything else in the future, it's often really good for them to learn how to write things down so that they remember how to do it the next time. If you start a job and your boss shows you how to use the cash register, they might be okay showing you a couple times, but they're not going to want to show you 5 or 10 times. So to be able to take those notes in a way that you can understand them later is a really good skill.
That is an excellent point. I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I keep referring back to the young woman I worked with last night, but similar situation in that we were working out of a book that some of the newer workbooks have, like, they present the information, then they do guided practice, and then they do the independent practice. So we were at the guided practice section, and she was just sitting back and letting me point it out. And I'm like, no, I want you to write out these steps, because anything that we can do, if you can incorporate reading, writing, and listening into every activity that you have those learners do, writing it, saying it out loud, reading it out loud, listening to you read it out loud, the more ways you can get them engaged with that content, the greater the chances of them retaining it. So to Rachel's point, I was having her write it down step by step, because that's where they get caught. They can look at it. You can point to each phase and they can, yes, 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 yes. But then you put that pencil in their hand and say, okay, you do it. It's a whole lot more difficult for them. And she gets she would start to stumble. So have them write it as you talk through it with them, do it with them, and just gradually start backing off that support. But then it gives them something to refer back to at a later time when you're not there, when they're trying to do it on their own. I sent her home we worked through a number of the problems together, and then I sent her home with a few of them to do on her own and bring back Thursday. And she might completely blank out when she's out of that tutoring room. Their setting has so much to do with what they can retain and what they can do. They might be able to do something specifically with you right there beside them, but then you put them out in the real world and ask them to do that same task, and it's a whole different level of difficulty for them. So that's just another push for why we make things as realistic and real life in the tutoring sessions as possible, so that there's less transference of skills when they go to do it in the real world. All right, let's get back to any other questions, challenges, successes that anyone would like to share with us. Looks like you're going to get out a little early today. So if you have any questions that you think about after the fact, here's my contact information. And I'll still leave it open for your comments while I share the last slide in the webinar.
All right. So this last slide is just to remind you, and I think I have been kind of bad at remembering to remind you. So, but we do have a survey that is available. I'm just going to put the link in the chat. And this is a way for you to tell us how helpful you find these sessions, if there's anything that you would like to hear about in the future, or even just if you want to be on the mailing list so that you get the email reminders about the volunteer webinars directly to your email instead of from your tutor coordinator. So we love it when people do the survey, so please go ahead and do that. And then next month, we're going to be hearing some strategies for teaching vocabulary. This is for both English language learners and native-born American students, native English-speaking students, because all of our students struggle with vocabulary sometimes, and that might actually be something you encounter in your math instruction as well. So if you are interested, that will be next month, April 12th, again at 9:30. So thank you for joining, and please feel free to reach out either via the survey or email if you have any further questions or suggestions.
Where did you say your
Thank you
contact
very
information would
much,
be?
everyone.
So my contact information or Kim's?
Kim's.
Yeah. So Kim's is on the screen there. It's KJR.
Okay, I got it now.
All right. Yeah.
And
Penn
thank you
State
very
has
much,
those-
everyone.
Right. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.
I'm going to end the recording now.